I want to welcome Brigadier General retired Michael Herzog, who is about to moderate a panel discussion on delegitimization and Israel, and also talking a little bit about the Arab Spring here at the Israeli Presidential Conference. Thank you for sitting down and speaking with me.
Thank you, Ed. It's a pleasure.
Tell us about delegitimization. What does it mean when we talk about delegitimization of Israel?
Essentially, delegitimization means when people deny the legitimacy of the Zionist idea, namely a nation state for the Jewish people. Now, in real world, it expresses itself a bit differently. No, most people don't come out like Ahmadinejad and say Israel should be wiped off the map. Most people use a legitimate space of criticism, and there is a legitimate space to criticize Israel, or seemingly legitimate, in order to extend criticism and kind of demonize Israel, present it as an illegitimate entity by nature, by foundation, and so on. Now, we've always experienced here in Israel wars of hostility, non-recognition, and so on since our inception, but there is a sense that this is a bit different now because it's moving from the Middle East and communist countries to the West, from the sidelines to center stage. There's more discussion about it. And, it's a bit like climate change. We all know it's there. We feel the heat, but we don't pay much attention to it in our daily life. But it's there, and it's a serious threat for the state of Israel.
Delegitimization, we got a little experience of that in the United States when Helen Thomas, a very long-term White House correspondent, said that the Jews in Israel should just relocate back to Europe. That's the type of thing that you're talking about.
Yes, it's when people basically question implicitly or explicitly the legitimacy of a nation state for the Jews, and they do it in various ways. For example, they criticize not only what Israel does, but what Israel is. They use certain coins like apartheid state, like Nazi state, ethnic cleansing, war criminal by nature, not only specific war crimes, but war criminal, and so on and so forth. And this is something that we're experiencing more and more, and it expresses itself in every walk of life, in media, in the new media, on campuses, in initiatives of BDS, boycott, divestment, sanctions, and legal issues. We attacked legally what's called lawfare today, both Israel as a state and Israeli individuals. Just to give you an example, I personally cannot go to England because I might find myself behind bars as a war criminal being an Israeli general.
That's amazing. I mean, and the UK is at least putatively an ally of Israel. Right?
Yes, so they apply what's called universal jurisdiction. Meaning you can try anybody for anything anywhere in the world, and we're exposed to it. And that's why I can't go there. And we had the same experience with Spain, and until they changed the law. Now, they didn't change the law because of us. They changed the law because someone uses it against the Chinese. And they freaked out.
Oh.
They issued an ultimatum to the Spaniards, and they changed the law.
Well, I guess the Chinese have a little bit more economic power than most other countries.
I would
do.
say so, yeah.
Yeah.
Probably.
So and that's another form of legitimacy, but that's a topic for a different time. General Herzog, the chief. Speaking of the UK, the chief Chief Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sachs, I believe his name is, in yesterday's plenary session, talked about how the whole structure of human rights laws and culture has sort of been turned against Israel in this sense, in terms of delegitimization, using some of the terms, and he was very specific about this in the plenary session yesterday, using terms like apartheid state, and the Jews are the new Nazis, the Palestinians are the new Jews, etc. What does that say to you about the human rights structures that have been put in place?
Well, I think he's right on spot. I think what we see today is that this human rights space is conquered by people who are using it or abusing it to attack the state of Israel, these people don't really care about human rights. I mean, the whole space of civil society and human rights organizations and so on, most of them don't really care about human rights, and we're first exposed to it in a serious manner during the first, what's called Durban conference in Durban, South Africa in 2001, which was convened under the auspices of the UN, and 1,500 NGOs were there stating that Israel is an apartheid state and should therefore be completely isolated. That's a quote. So, and if you look at the list of those NGOs, most of them seemingly devoted to human rights. They're not really, representing human rights the way probably you and I would interpret it.
Exactly. Let's switch topics to the Arab Spring. I briefly talked before the interview started about the Arab Spring. There's, again, at this conference, a sort of a wide variety of opinions about the Arab Spring, from Bernard-Henri Levy, who said that he's very optimistic about this, and it's almost certainly a good thing for Israel, and to Niall Ferguson, who said this is going to be an utter disaster. He just hopes it's going to turn out well in the end. Where are you on that continuum, and what's your view on the Arab Spring so far?
Well, I think you have to distinguish between long-term and short and medium-term. Long-term, it could turn into something positive, namely you'll see more open space for political inclusion, more democracy, more freedoms, and so on, because people demand it. Short and medium-term, I'm not sure. There are a lot of risks. There are many, many anti-democratic elements out there on the sidelines waiting to fill the vacuum, fill the void. They will do it, and so what we see, I'm sure you feel here in Israel, most Israelis are rather skeptics given Israel's experience, the tough neighborhood we live in.
I've heard rough, I've heard tough, I've heard lousy, depending on who you talk to.
So I think we should focus on what can the international community do to help guide the transition from autocracy to democracy in the right direction, and not let it be hijacked by anti-democratic forces. Let's take the example of Egypt, for example. Egypt is the most important element in the Arab world. I'm sure they are headed towards elections. I'm sure you'll have more political inclusion, more space, open elections and so on. But odds are for more Turkey-like illiberal democracy, let's call it that way. Namely, it's not full-fledged democracy, Western style. It is where you'll probably have Islamists part of a ruling coalition in Egypt.
Right.
And that will have an impact. So let's be very careful about it. I mean, it's not spring yet. We might have to go through a winter before we get to the spring.
And that's a strategic issue for you. I mean, you're a military man. I'd really like to hear if you have concerns about the strategic change in Israel, in Egypt in the short term, because Egypt had been blockading Gaza, had been sealing the border in Gaza. Briefly, they unsealed it, and then apparently discovered why it was sealed in the first place and sealed it back up. And that was the last I heard. I don't know what the status is now, but how big of a concern is that?
It is a concern. We have, as you know, a peace agreement with Egypt in place since 1979, and it is a really strategic asset for Israel. I believe that any Egyptian government in the foreseeable future will probably maintain the peace treaty, at least formally. But under that umbrella, the nature of relations is probably going to change. We had, with all differences notwithstanding, we had quite close coordination with the previous Egyptian government in countering terrorism, radical Islamism in the region, Al-Qaeda, Hamas, and so on. When Israel launched Operation Castled in Gaza in December 2008 to stop the firing of rockets on Israel, we had the quiet consent of the Egyptian government. Now it seems to me that they changed their attitude towards Hamas. They are opening up. They reopened the Rafah crossing, by the way, to answer your question. They said that they want to mend fences with Iran. And so I would watch Egypt very, very carefully. It's not, I don't think there's no leverage of the international community or some Arab states. For example, the Saudis recently offered the Egyptians $4 billion assistance because they have a dire economic situation, but they conditioned it on Egypt not mending fences with Iran. So there are ways you can influence this transition.
Finally, what do you hope to get out of this conference? I mean, obviously you're one of the presenters here. What is it that you're hoping to accomplish here at the conference, especially with your panel on delegitimization?
Well, we have an excellent set of people really qualified to discuss the phenomenon from Europe, from the US, and from Israel. And I believe that this mix and the exchange between people with different perspectives, various perspectives and experiences and so on, probably help us better understand the phenomenon and come up with some conclusions. Ultimately, it should be a policy-guided conference, and we are looking for how we can shape realities and what difference we can make.
General Michael Herzog, thank you very much for sitting down with me today.
Thank you very much.